It started on Yuntai Mountain, in the Cave of Explosive Frogs. An accurate wave of the hand is detected. In the darkness, the faint outlines of a huge light green frog could be seen. It took less than a second after her discovery, and a blonde guy in slightly shabby clothes already flew up to her. He was wearing a white shirt and a dark raincoat on top, torn at the edges. Apparently he has been serving his master for a long time. The trousers were tight, but at the same time they were comfortable and did not constrain his movements, and he had dark boots on his feet. He managed to immobilize the frog in a jump, several times more than he himself. The sword was clearly cut in half, and the frog, in honor of the name of the cave, was blown up in the air. A system prompt appeared in the space. It said that one baby explosive frog was defeated. The hero gets 1 experience point, and the spell resistance is 41.5%. A total of 6926 frogs were defeated. The guy was wondering, standing with a sword in his hands, how long has he been here? Frogs were being picked up from all sides, and the hero continued his inner monologue. 1 year. 3. The system prompt showed that there were more defeated frogs. The spell resistance in percentage was growing. 5 years. The guy fought monsters from year to year, as he did not notice that the number of defeated frogs exceeded 100,000. 10 years flew by like one day in pursuit of increased resistance. He reasoned that only stability would help him defeat the malicious magician who imprisoned him in this devil-cursed place, and then he would definitely get out of this absolutely unsafe world. The hero struck the last blow, and then a hint appeared that the Frog King was defeated. 50 units of experience were obtained. Spell resistance is 100%. He also received a new rank of Master Frog Hunter. The first mark was passed, the qualification was obtained. The sword is 10 years old. The sword of 10 years. Every top 3 attacks receive the property of accumulation of power. Accumulating strength increases strength by 100%. The system prompt appeared in front of him again, which said that his level had risen to the 5th, and his experience points had exceeded 300. The system offered to raise the level and move on to the next one. There were 2 possible answers, yes and no. A gloved finger reached for the no answer button. He was still breathing heavily, and his face was sweating from the hard battle. There was one question in my head. How did it all start? A guy of about 17 was sitting at the table, and a sign with the inscription "Game Over" appeared on his computer screen. His character was defeated, and above him towered a magician in a black robe, with a long gray beard, in a dark, triangular hat, which is characteristic of wizards in all games and movies. In his hand was a long wooden staff, with a massive tip rounded at the top. The guy's room was lit only by the light from the projector. There was a mess on the table and floor. The hand on the keyboard was trembling, and the other hand tightly gripped the mouse. At the same moment, he screamed loudly, clutching his short blonde hair. How could he lose? The guy played for 3 days and 3 nights, but he couldn't even pass the first level. Damn boss wizard Guang Dai. He was stronger all the time. Anger could be read in the tired eyes of the hero. Bruises under his eyes did not make him go to bed. He slammed his fist on the table and started the game again. But suddenly a pop-up window appeared on the screen, in which it was written that if you download the program, you can skip 1 level. Sensing a trick, he closed the window, grinning. The lame game he spent so much effort on can't fool him. The guy typed plugin in the search. He reasoned out loud that the game could not have been created by someone else, the development of the plugin in the first place. On one of the sites, a user under the nickname Ziyin, I wrote that if the players are as angry at the magician as he is, then this professional module with ultra-high magic resistance is just what they need. The guy pointed the cursor at the inscription "Download now." This damned magician won't be able to defeat him for the 100th time. Super high magic resistance is what he needed. The module began to load, and the blonde, anticipating an imminent victory, was insidiously giggling. But suddenly the loading stopped and the monitor sparkled. Cracks appeared on the screen. It looks like it was too strong a virus. But after the blue pixel hand came out of the bright screen, it no longer seemed like just a virus. The guy screamed loudly, and the hand became bigger and wrapped around his arms. He did not understand what was happening, trying to rest his bare feet on the floor in fear. But an unknown force pulled him into the monitor. The sparks went out, the cracks disappeared, and the computer turned off. The inscription "Welcome, Adventurer" lit up in front of my eyes, which was voiced by an unknown voice. The guy opened his amber eyes wide, asking out loud who was talking to him. He was in outer space, in his home clothes, disheveled and not understanding what he was doing here and what kind of place this was. The voice continued to broadcast, despite the questions that the guy was pouring out. This world consisted of 9 planets. There were gods and demons, as well as power and laws. Hearing the last phrase, the hero became alert. It seemed to him that he had heard it somewhere quite recently. If he remembered correctly, then the next step was to tell about a planet that was destroyed because of the gods. The starting point was the planet Mistra. Mistra once had a thriving civilization. Because of the wrath of the gods, the planet was bombarded for 3 days and 3 nights. She was wiped off the face of the earth. The gods had already abandoned her. The hero's face stretched out in horror. He suddenly realized that he was in a game that he had been playing for some time at home, in his room, at his computer. The story about the planet continued. Under the influence of magic power, more and more people and animals turned into monsters. People can only survive by playing cruelly. The guy was screaming in despair for the whole joke to stop. He couldn't play anything, begged to be allowed to go home and finish the game. There was only silence, and then again the voice saying that the adventure is about to begin. The hero abruptly flew down, previously hanging in space, shouting loudly. He fell to the ground, breathing heavily, arguing that he was too carried away by the game, that he really dreamed of getting into it. If you continue in the same spirit, then the King of Thunder and Lightning will take him away. A system prompt appeared in front of him, on which information about him was written. Roger, 24 years old, a first-level Zeayan profession. An assessment of his strength, intelligence, physique, perception and charm was painted. Entry level, steady, learns Kai techniques, hides in the city, agile. He had the skills of collecting, medicine, healing, climbing and exploitation. The guy rubbed his eyes. Was it reality? He shook his head in disbelief, and his gaze caught on the small animals that got out not far from him. A sign with the inscription Red-Horned Rat, first level, appeared above them. Lifting his head up, hero saw a bird flying over him. The sign read Golden Bird, 6th level. Slowly rising, the blonde man walked to the edge of the cliff on which he found himself and saw a lot of animals. Above each of them there was a sign explaining its name and its level. Everything that was happening now was not a dream. He wasn't in the real world. How so? His parents will be alarmed if they find out that he is no more. Then they will call the police and then check the computer. Being in his thoughts, the guy did not notice how monsters barely resembling people were rushing at him with a stomp. They were in ragged clothes, their limbs were like people's, but at the same time they were deformed, and their eyes were black, with small white pupils. One of the monsters, who quickly ran up to Roger, was about to bite him with his huge teeth, when the guy screamed, falling down the mountain. He was pushed out by monsters. As he fell, his face stretched out in horror, and thoughts raced in his head. He just clicked on the program. Why torture him like that? Moreover, when others travel, it looks very cool and impressive, and he, just after entering a new world, should drop his skates. But suddenly, if he dies in this world, he will settle back in his own. The guy, shaking off and relaxing, spread his arms freely, allowing himself to fall. The action continues in the city of Tonma. People are scurrying back and forth along the narrow streets. Girls are wearing dresses that are not similar to those worn in everyday life. The guys are wearing work clothes. Roger was lying on the bed unconscious, with a wet rag on his head. People crowded around him, wondering at the strange clothes of the guy. One of the crowd asked why they decided to save this guy and bring him to the city. The dark-haired guy in silver armor replied that everyone would do the same in his place. The man who was standing next to him asked what was so unusual about this guy, to which he received an answer that surprised him. The seemingly frail kid dealt with a dozen monsters alone. This was the absolute truth, which those present did not believe at first. A dark-haired man in armor said that he was delivering a batch of grain through the very place where he found an unusual young man. Usually it was very loud because monsters were feeding there, but at that moment there was a lull. Looking around, he found a young man who was sitting on top of a mountain of strange creatures. This pose and scene shocked him, thinking that the unknown hero was just exhausted fighting monsters and fell asleep on the spot. There are some Retsari who have excellent skills at such a young age. At this time, Roger, with his eyes closed, was discussing how he managed to survive after falling from a cliff. Probably, the unconscious monster fell first, serving as a soft pillow for the guy, which did not allow him to break anything in his body. A real adventurer should have such luck. But suddenly he coughed, squinting from an unpleasant feeling, and attention was paid to him. As if nothing had happened, Roger called the guy in the armor by name, thanking him. Glad to be recognized, Kane asked where the guy's knowledge about him came from. Awkwardly scratching the back of his head and smiling, the blonde man replied that it was difficult not to recognize the captain of the city guard team, whom everyone knows for 100 miles. Kane was surprised. Is he really that famous? When Roger said that the guy was good at it, he became very proud, putting his hands on his hips and laughing. It is his duty to protect citizens, so you should not admire him so much. Roger wondered if he told him that there was a hunter named Kane in every game, would the guy be upset? He also thought that he had infiltrated their company well, skillfully bought suitable equipment in different stores in the city. Since there was no turning back, it only meant that he had to become stronger, and in the end, defeat the boss who gave the guy so much inconvenience. If even after 10 years he could not leave the game, then he had to pass it for sure. If that was the case, then he was going to deal with everyone on his difficult path. But time after time, system prompts and improvement opportunities only appeared in front of him. He suddenly shouted in the middle of the forest that it was all complete nonsense, and he would have to play this game for the rest of his days. A bright green frog was jumping next to him, croaking loudly, but without noticing it, Roger sat right on this spot. The frog croaked pathetically and lit up, and a system prompt appeared in front of the guy, saying that he had received an improvement in resistance to spells. Staring at the clue, he jumped up in surprise, examining what used to be a frog, and tears sprang from his eyes. She sacrificed herself to guide the lost hero on the true path, which means that he should not give up and defeat absolutely all the frogs. 10 years later, the guy finally waited for the day to which he had been going for so long. Now the game will begin for him. Roger was standing at a bulletin board with orders for monsters. Holding his gaze on a piece of paper on which was written the order to hunt the demon Shelob, he took it. A girl with long blonde hair put an ad on the table with a bang to a man with long curly hair and a beard, saying that she was applying for the destruction of a demon. Roger was standing nearby, inadvertently overhearing the conversation of the blonde, whose name was Dorothy. The man said that the demon was too dangerous and the girl could not participate. She was worried that the demon might hurt someone, which could lead to a worse outcome. But he stood his ground. She also put her own life at risk. She made a pitiful face. The demon was her brother's enemy. She wanted revenge. Standing behind the blonde, Roger realized that it was about Kane, and he frowned. Memories hit his head, where the smiling Kane offers him to stay in a cozy house, and a little red-haired girl is standing next to him, smiling cheerfully and holding out clothes to the guy, saying that he can change clothes for her. This was the very beginning of Roger's journey. The memory changed to the one where Kane offers him to go hunting monsters together, because everyone wanted to see the skills of the young hero so much. Kane, it was this man who helped the young man to survive the most difficult moments at the beginning of the journey. But he could not thank his faithful companion. In one of the sorties, Kane did not calculate that the demon would be too strong. Having been hit, red trickles were running down his lips, and his eyes were squeezed shut from pain. Roger held him in his arms, asking him not to talk until he took Kane to the doctor. A red-haired girl was sitting on her knees next to him, putting her little hand on the guy's knee. He asked Roger for only one thing, and that was to take care of Dorothy. Roger assured him that everything would be fine and he would do everything possible for this. Little Dorothy was crying bitterly, and the paths of intently pure children's tears were still flowing down her cheeks. They were tears of grief. She treasured her brother too much. Roger clenched his teeth, firmly decided that he would kill this demon with his own hands and avenge him. Only then did he realize how terrible this game was. Although he was a traveler like everyone else, but his 6 attributes were a little stronger than ordinary people. But still there is a gap between him and professional players. Roger knew that there was nothing in this game. Therefore, it is not worth waving your fists in vain. You need to gradually improve, accumulate strength, and then show all of yourself. And now, 10 years later, Roger is not as weak as before. It's time to fight back. He was hailed by a man with a beard who was talking to Dorothy. Since the guy is here, he should try to convince the girl. She suddenly looked around, asking if he had also come to dissuade her from ordering. The guy clearly stamped a refusal, saying that he was also going to apply for it. The man stared at the guy and the girl in shock, but eventually agreed, saying that many adventurers underestimate this hike, so a preliminary task was invented. After its execution, they will be presented with detailed information about the demon. Both travelers looked at the man, surprised. Was it really so serious that a special task was needed? But before that, preparation was needed. Roger skillfully fought with the demons of the Red Tide, wielding his sword. A system prompt appeared in front of him, which said that if 3 level 4 Red Tide demons were defeated, then a bull's resistance would be increased, which was a useful skill that was worth improving. The guy noticed that a red cloud was rising in front of him, which meant that monsters were gathering in that place. He took off and ran in oblivion to that cloud. An hour later, Dorothy was already sitting among a field of pumpkins, having finished her business. She complained that Roger was too slow. The guy asked her to prepare weapons and everything else, and he will make a potion, because the demon queen of the Red Tide is an elite monster of the 5th level. They were supposed to be bustling in an hour. Bored with idleness, the girl jumped up from the pumpkin, shouting loudly that if Roger only tried to lie to her, he would have a hard time. Meanwhile, Roger was watching a gathering of red-tide demons, which, according to his observations, were about 30. The thickest red cloud was in a tent located right in the middle of the pavilion. However, the red-tide demons had neither intelligence nor soul. How could they put up a tent? Maybe after their demise they were able to develop intelligence. To humiliate these monsters would be harder than he thought. The guy pulled out a bottle of bright yellow potion from his belt, and a system prompt appeared in front of him. It was a bottle with an element of a highly concentrated polymer element. This potion dealt lightning damage, but the damage decreases each time. Pressing the cherished bottle to his cheek, the contents of which were obtained from the fat glands of almost 1,000 magical demons. All hope was only on him. In the center of the canyon, the demons attacked a cart of animals that they wanted to eat. Roger stood triumphantly with the potion in one hand and the other on his side. He gloated out loud, grinning. And then, with a good swing, he threw the bottle right into the monster food cart. At the same second, a bright and powerful lightning struck there. It was the potion that worked. The young man, hearing the noise of lightning, triumphantly clenched his fists, rejoicing that he got where he was aiming. He jumped to the ground, which was in a cloud of dust. A system prompt appeared in front of him, which said that he had defeated 20 monsters in one blow. Here is a reliable potion. But he was alerted only by one thing. Why is there no sign that the boss was defeated? At that moment, as if reading Roger's thoughts, out of nowhere, a huge sinewy leg landed next to him, breaking the ground. From a cloud of dust that had not yet settled, 2 red eyes stared at him, which were so high that Roger was stunned. As soon as the dust settled, a giant monster's face stared at the guy, compared to which Roger seemed tiny. Swinging his clawed paw, he hit the ground next to Roger, who in turn barely managed to jump back. Covering his face from the stones and earth flying at him, the hero did not understand how the monster withstood the effects of his potion. The demon was not going to stop and attacked more and more powerfully each time. He suddenly puffed out his cheeks, taking in more air, and began to blow so hard that purple dust came out of his mouth along with the air. Settling, it split all the objects it fell on, turning into sand. But the guy firmly withstood the attack and grinned. Such a powerful acid cloud technique, it must be an elite monster. Unfortunately for the enemy, Roger was not affected by such techniques. But still the hero grimaced, bent over from unpleasant sensations and spitting sand out of his mouth. Still, the technique worked, but not to the full extent. How many years has this monster been living here? Well, it stinks from his mouth. Without having time to clear his throat, a monster appears behind the guy, about to grab him with a clawed hand. He slammed Roger into the ground, saying that there was something special about him, since he was not afraid of acid breathing techniques. No wonder such a daredevil decided to break into the territory of monsters alone. Roger beamed. Did the monster have a mind? He could talk. It was no accident that his bottle of potion did not affect the boss. There had to be an explanation for this. Angry, the demon gave up more than Roger, and his hand swelled up a lot. If the scoundrel expected more, then he will see it. The demon used the explosive corpse technique. Grinning, he noticed that no one had yet managed to prevent this technique. He was sure of it until the guy called out to him from behind, and the monster's face stretched in surprise. Roger stood as if nothing had happened. Only a bandage was tied on his nose. He is surprised by such a powerful trick, and he was really interested in how the demon pulled it off and why it stank so much inside and outside. The demon was stunned. Did this brute think his attack was just smelly? To which Roger calmly agreed. The monster, unable to withstand such humiliation, screamed, "It's impossible." The young man was lying to him. Finally becoming angry at such impudence, the monster roared loudly, swallowing his fallen Seretniki, which allowed him to raise the level to the 7th. Purple sparks were coming out of the demon's mouth and it was getting bigger and more massive. Roger stood steadfast, leaning on his sword. He was not surprised by the absorption of power, and when the demon rushed at him with screams, the guy sighed. They had a difference in strength, but the young man had a trump card up his sleeve. High-level players who fought low-level monsters are limited in experience and rewards, so he suppressed his level just to refresh his resistance power to magic. He grinned, his amber eyes flashing. Thoughtfully, the guy saved up experience points and finally they came in handy. A system notification appeared in front of him and Roger pressed the level update button. A bright blue light was coming from the guy. His hair and clothes were blowing in the wind. The level has been upgraded to 6th. She pressed the level update button again and again, and the monster's face stretched in surprise, realizing that the guy was somehow becoming stronger than him. Smiling insidiously, Roger dealt with the elite monster in a matter of minutes, getting more and more new impressions. Next came his favorite part, the treasure hunt. There was a strong stench in Paleka and Vokirk. So many monsters were defeated, but everything was not in vain. Roger found a fortune, 6,000 copper coins and 1 piece of mithril, which was a valuable metal on the market that could be sold on the market for 2,000 copper coins. Already imagining how he would spend this money, Roger was glad that after 10 years of hard work he would be able to eat pumpkin normally. Isn't this the happiness of a rich man? But then the young man's gaze caught on a ring lying in a broken wooden locker. It was silver, and there was a small skull on it, carefully made with jewelry. The system prompt stated that it was a suicide ring. Its spell was a strong burning storm that forms 3 cyclones, burning all living things in the radius of action. The spell could be invoked with Mistra's 9th curse, but it also had a 1-time per day usage limit. Carefully reading the characteristics of the ring, Roger understood why it has such a name. But the magic damage was exactly what the guy needed. It seemed that this ring was created just for him. However, it is a spell that activates magic. The student mages of Tonma City don't seem to know the 9th spell. Thinking that maybe someone from the City of Precious Stones knows something, Roger decided to hide the ring and think about it later. Suddenly, an angry Dorothy approached the guy, who couldn't believe that while Roger was collecting medicines, he had killed a whole crowd of red-tide demons. The young man laughed when he saw how funny the girl was angry. He patted her blonde hair, telling her not to get angry because he also wants to fight with her side by side. But this opportunity does not come often. Besides, he wanted to test his strength. The girl tisked and turned away. Since Roger is unharmed, then so be it, she forgives this time. But she didn't think that the guy would cope with them alone. It's amazing. But it gave her confidence in the successful completion of their campaign against the corpse demon. Roger assured her that they would definitely manage. Standing in the forge, Roger looked at the weapons and armor that hung on the wall. The blacksmith guessed that the guys would come to him today. He had heard how they had dealt with 10 monitors this morning. The guy hehechnal and said that they were just lucky, to which the blacksmith noted Roger's constant restraint. The young man turned to the blacksmith, calling him Miller, whether he was ready to do whatever Roger wanted. To which he agreed. A guy of large build with shoulder-length blonde hair, pointed ears, wearing work clothes and a hand more than half covered with golden scales opened a door in the wall, showing Roger various weapons. There was a choice of a blade, a sword and 1 bow. The blade was called Akatsuki and had an S level. Its ability was execution. The hilt of the blade was red, wrapped with a black ribbon. The blade on one side was black, and on the other, pure steel. The Kingxia sword was turquoise in color, pointed at the end. He also had an S level, and his ability was controlled by hell. The bow was called Xian. It is purple and curly. It looked very majestic. Ability Wind Language, level S. Roger, with shining eyes, grabbed the Akatsuki blade, examining it and saying admiringly that this is the best weapon he has seen, so each also has its own ability. Miller pointed to 2 large logs of a tree, telling the guy to try out a new weapon on them. Roger asked if it was worth doing, as he was not sure of the strength, but the blacksmith insisted that Roger try out the sword. Then, standing in a fighting pose and holding the blade with both hands, Roger said that she would try out the Akatsuki sword, the execution technique, and that Miller would not be angry if he suddenly broke something. The smiling guy noticed that if Roger was so good at dealing with demons, then what would happen to the tree? Even if he demolishes the house, he will be fine. Miller seemed to anticipate further events. The house really could not stand still. From one swing of the sword in Roger's hands, a good half of the building collapsed, and he, having shone, noticed that the sword was just great. Dorothy came up to the guys. She was looking for Roger, and he, saying that the girl came just in time, boasted to her of his new weapon. She smiled radiantly, saying that she also had something to show. She shook a piece of paper wrapped in a scroll in her hands. Surprised, Roger asked what was there. It turned out to be information about the demon and a complete list of those who will participate in the campaign. The guy smiled, pleasantly surprised that Dorothy got the necessary information so quickly, to which she said not to doubt her abilities. Inspired, the young man began to wonder who was there and to ask about the plan of the campaign. There were only 35 people in this team. Among them are 3 in the vanguard, 19 in the rear and 13 in the punitive campaign. In the main forces there is an adventurer of the 10th level and above. Others are also great adventurers in the city. This trip was necessary for Dorothy and Roger. The corpse demon is very cunning. The monsters near the lair are just bait. Humans are weak compared to monsters, so they had to outsmart them. The first thing to deal with was the winged beasts. There are monsters with a snake's head. Then it was necessary to get to the southern slope, which is located near the demon's lair. When the destination is right in front of them, it will just be necessary to destroy his last 2 eyes. Then they will be able to capture the enemy's capital. But the ghost guards are very perceptive. It will not be easy to get close to them. If you break through by force, it will be easy to scare the snake. But suddenly, Dorothy noticed that Roger was not there. She looked around and saw him running after the demon they had missed by sight. The group began to resent what this guy was doing there. But one man said that he corrects the mistakes of his comrades. It was an escaped demon who went straight to the tower as soon as he attracted the attention of the guards. Their plan would immediately fail. Roger caught up with the desperate demon and completed what he had begun. But as soon as he finished with the monster, the system was stunned by the information that when questioning this demon, the speed of hair growth in the nose increases. Roger even regretted that he finished him off. But there was no time to relax. The guard almost noticed him, but the guy deftly hid behind a tree. The young man tried to sit quietly, remembering that the ghostly guardian could feel traces of life. If he made a big step, there would be revelations, nothing good. His group noticed that Roger had attracted the guard's attention, and while fussing, someone suggested sending a man to cover for the guy. Dorothy said that this way he could be noticed faster, so they can only watch in silence. The guy still found a way out, pulling out a purple bow from his bosom, which Miller offered him, shot up, hitting the guard exactly. Thanks to the blessing of the wind, it was easy to hit the target. The next step is to quickly remove the guards in the tower. Roger took a decisive step towards her. Meanwhile, Dorothy was jubilant. The guy would definitely not let them down. But it was too early to rejoice, because according to intelligence there are at least 3 ghostly guards in the tower, if not more. If the guard outside was injured, then others should have felt it. But before the expedition group could begin to be indignant, the flag of the city of Tonma was already flying over the tower. Roger captured the tower alone. Everyone immediately bustled, heading for the East Tower. Roger had changed a lot. He was unrecognizable. The group still had to destroy the demon's eyes in order to enter its lair without any problems. They wanted to reach the East Tower as soon as possible. Roger, in turn, did not even have time to get tired. Only a few guards and 2 soldiers, but fear resistance and sword extraction speed increased. From the height of the tower, with the help of the Kai technique, he noticed a faint red glow. Maybe he will find something useful there. Roger was walking down a sandy staircase, walking towards a faint red light. He covered his nose with his hand. There was not the most pleasant aroma in the air, but still better than from the demon of the red tide. He came across many different boxes covered with cloth. Valuables should definitely be hidden inside. Roger was already anticipating how rich he would become. Impatiently bending over the cloth, under which there was clearly something valuable, he rubbed his hands, smiling. Grasping the edge of it, he suddenly poked, and the picture that appeared in front of him plunged him into shock. For many years, people had disappeared from the city of Tonma, and now Roger realized that they had been caught and brutally dealt with. They were all here in a terrible state. The guy's face clearly showed fright. He was thrown into a cold sweat. For so many years of playing this game, he did not feel anything like this. But he really lives in a world where he has to face such evil. It was really terrible, which scared the shivers. A flash of light in the shape of a kameta suddenly rushed out of nowhere, glowing with a bright pink light. After making a loud noise when landing, a voice rang out. In a cloud of smoke, a snow-white smile appeared, which was not pleasant, but on the contrary, repulsive, which by its very appearance mocks you. The mysterious voice also mocked the guy, saying that he was softened, since he could not dodge such attacks, and the quality of the current adventurers leaves much to be desired. 2 paws appeared out of the darkness. They were pale, with 4 fingers, claws. The guy still couldn't make out the owner of that voice, who kept talking to him. The most frightening thing was that he saw Roger, but his boyfriend didn't. He even asked him to turn around to look at the young man, not only from behind. When Roger turned around, he saw a low magician in front of him. He had very pale skin, a fanged mouth, and his eyes were covered by a huge red hat with folds on the cap. There was a black collar around his neck, which looked very massive. Also on the shoulders and the color of the hat was a cape with ragged ends, as if they were frayed from old age. In his hand was a staff that glowed faintly with a red light. The magician Hehikmel, noticing the young man's beauty, his skin must have been very elastic. Roger was clearly angry. His eyes were covered with overgrown blonde hair. All the disappearances of people and these terrible things were the work of this magician. From under the hat, eyes with red irises flashed at the guy, and the magician's mouth twisted in a grin. revealing a view of snow-white fangs. He asked if the guy meant this stuff, mockingly asking if Roger liked the sight. The hobby of a short magician is not so bad. He began to describe in detail all the difficulties of his occupation, and Roger looked down at him, listening to the ravings of a crazy dwarf. The guy's hands clenched into fists by themselves, unable to withstand such horror. He rolled behind his sword, saying that the magician was just a beast. Roger, in a fit of anger, tried to hit him with his sword, but the magician turned out to be too fast, easily dodging, and his voice was already heard from above, asking if the young man was so eager to become his new work of art. Smiling nastily, the magician used his staff to direct a bright pink ray at Roger, wanting to finish what he had started and already counting on victory. But Roger withstood this blow, too, surprised by this, but at the same time amused. The magician was eager to continue to find out how much such a brave guy would be enough. However, it is not possible to defeat a magician simply with a fist, not to cause any physical harm. But suddenly, a flurry of blows rained down on the magician. Roger was hitting them right on target, and the magician couldn't even resist it. But at one point, a sonorous child's voice was heard asking to stop these blows, and in front of the guy was not a nasty magician, but a little girl with cute tails on top of her head. From surprise, Roger stopped striking. Taking advantage of this, the magician immediately used a second-level spell, a flame burning rivers. A huge column of flame rose in front of him, and the little girl acquired an inhuman expression. Her hair rose in smoke. The magician said he didn't know what Roger used to counter his spells, but it takes many years to master this flame technique. She has destructive power against which the guy had no chance. Continuing to make victorious speeches, the magician did not immediately notice that Roger resisted this technique of his. The guy easily defeated the Blood Mage's disciple, for which he received 5 experience points, and as a reward he received bronze coins, magic scrolls, a bottle of dragon acid, and 1 magic rope. He also managed to get the Encyclopedia of Universal Spells, previously owned by the magician. Leaving the cave, Roger leafed through the National Book and thought about what had just happened. Even though the guy won, he couldn't say he was happy. In the novice village, he had been fighting weak wizards for 10 years and had almost forgotten how cruel this world was. Even though he was immune to spells now, it was still very dangerous here. This world is not a place for weaklings, which is why it should become stronger every day. Meanwhile, Roger's comrades were experiencing difficulties. They fell into a trap. There were sharp rocks in front of them, so high that they were all tiny compared to them. There was a swamp behind. There was no way to retreat either. It was a dead end. Suddenly, a crowd of monsters appeared from behind. There were too many of them. Roger walked along the road, thinking out loud. Haven't Dorothy and the others arrived yet? But the flag of the city of Tonno was already at the top of the south tower. A crystal ball appeared in front of the guy, and he wondered how this could happen in the wilderness. Most likely Dorothy is still there. The young man grabbed the ball with both hands, and Dorothy's image appeared in it. She said that the demon corpse had escaped to the grave field. It was not so easy to let it go. The group went after him, and Roger was told to catch up with them. The guy stared blankly into the ball. Roger's thoughts raced from one to the other. Has the demon escaped? Maybe he foresaw their campaign and that's why. No. But if you really want to escape, the place where the bones are buried is not far from the giant forest. But it is definitely impossible to be alone there. Roger had to catch up with him. Dorothy and the rest of the group fought side by side with the advancing monsters. They surrounded them. Striking with a massive weapon right next to the girl, the monster missed, and Dorothy managed to jump away, landing next to a man of strong build. He asked if Dorothy was okay, to which the girl nodded affirmatively, asking if Uncle Terry himself was okay. He replied that everything was under control. The fighting skills of the monsters were at an average level. But before he could continue the sentence, the man was touched by the monster while he was distracted by the conversation. His comrades immediately hurried to cover him, and an adventurer with healing skills had already used them to cure Terry. Everyone was fighting with all their might, and there was no end to the monsters. As soon as they dealt with one, 2 more immediately appeared from the ground. After a few hours of fighting, the herd of monsters is twice as large, even if they fail to win. The heroes will be completely exhausted and will no longer be able to defend themselves. Dorothy realized that the demon they were hunting was not running away at all, but deliberately led them into this trap. She underestimated him, putting all the allies at a disadvantage. Dorothy dodged the monster's attacks with the last of her strength. She heard how she was shouted to run, but the girl no longer had the strength. Now she finally understood what a difficult situation her brother was in. She was so sorry that her desire for revenge is as strong as before. But she can't do anything. Suddenly, a powerful explosion thundered behind the monsters, and flames engulfed almost all the demons. The comrades looked at each other incomprehensibly. They were afraid that this was a new enemy, but realizing that something on the contrary was helping them, they calmed down. With a loud cry, as if coming out of the flames, Roger turned to the allies. He said there was no way he would leave any of them. Kane's spirit was watching them all the time, and Roger was a man who kept his word. Revenge had to be done. Loudly shouting a spell, all the monsters rose into the air with the help of a flame that was simply huge, swallowing all the demons at once. It's definitely Ibble Roger. Everyone looked at the bright light of the flame in shock. Someone from the crowd shouted out, that is Roger really the legendary true dragon who is not afraid of the flame. It ended too quickly. The enemies they had been fighting for so long were gone in a matter of seconds. Dorothy has to go and find out for herself. Uncle Terry only asked her to be careful. Dorothy walked up to the guy, whose silhouette was barely visible because of the smoke. He sat with his back to her, saying that the enemy's bones needed to be soaked and all the ashes collected so that they could not rise again. She called his name softly, gently touching his shoulder. Dorothy still didn't believe it was Roger. Suddenly her bright eyes opened wide and she screamed. Hearing her cry, the adventurers immediately ran towards him, bypassing the clouds of smoke. Something was clearly wrong. About a dozen swords were aimed at the blonde guy who was sitting before, but the guy stood up, awkwardly scratching his head and blushing. His clothes were almost completely burned, which shocked those present. It turned out really awkward. Roger and I were fed up with warm clothes so that he wouldn't freeze. They couldn't let the man who saved them walk around like that. An admiring Dorothy ran up to the guy, saying that demons are not so good compared to him. Roger laughed sheepishly, saying that it was not his merit, but a simple accident. The guy looked at Dorothy in surprise. Although Burning Storm is a second-level magic technique, it is not enough to defeat a demon in a matter of seconds. In addition, the system did not notify about the victory over him. With the help of the Kai technique, he noticed a red glow. There were still monsters there. After warning everyone about this, he frowned, deciding to take everything on himself and leaving the allies to rest, to which they told Roger to be careful. They had a problem in the form of a demon who still had powers left. Because of the smoke that had not yet descended, Roger's group could not see what was happening to him. The monster's hand reached out to the guy, which he noticed with his peripheral vision. The comrades, hearing that something was happening in a cloud of smoke, wanted to rush to the guy's aid, but under their feet the ground turned into quicksand. Everyone present began to be sucked into the ground. When everyone was half in the sand, it was decided not to move, so that they would not be dragged even more. A ghostly guardian appeared out of the smoke, with bright blue lights instead of eyes. His voice was heard saying that the more they move, the more they are drawn in, and as soon as the group completely falls into the sand, it will turn into enemy soldiers. Everyone stared at the monster in front of them in shock. He continued his speech. There were so many new young soldiers in front of him. It's a pity that they are a little spoiled. Uncle Terry indignantly shouted that even if they went underground, he would not allow them to do terrible things with them, which Roger had managed to tell them about, which he had previously seen. Having angered the guard with his chatter, Terry immediately regretted paying for himself. The guard's voice was heard again, asking what other low-quality products were there. But immediately after his audacious words, a sword was thrown at his head, hitting him exactly with the hilt. This was done by Dorothy, asking what the bastard should do with Roger. The demon grinned angrily, noticing that he had never seen such a wonderful female skin. It was a wonderful product. In this case, there was no benefit from other allies, except for the girl herself. He grabbed the girl, holding her in his paws, and the adventurers immediately fell into the ground, and Dorothy screamed for the demon to fight her honestly. The voice kept telling me not to worry and just go with him. Then a hand in a black glove without fingers appeared out of the sand. It was Roger, defiantly putting his hands on display and smiling. He said that the demon simply could not miss such a wonderful, elastic and smooth skin like his. The girl looked at Roger in surprise and entreaty. The demon was surprised to notice that while the guy was under the sand, his skin was not eroded. An amazing talent. The monster let Dorothy fall to the ground, and she burst into tears, saying that Roger scared the hell out of her. The girl thought she would never see him again. The guy smiled tenderly, stroking the crying blonde on the head. How could Roger afford for her to face danger alone? The demon raised his voice, trying to interrupt such a touching moment, but the guys didn't seem to pay attention to him. Dorothy, with tears in her eyes, excitedly babbled that everyone had disappeared into quicksand, and she thought that Roger had also disappeared without a trace. But he hurried to calm her down. When the guy came, he took everyone away, so they were fine. He also couldn't let the girl fight alone for a long time. at any time, even if he wasn't around, because they were bound to meet again. He held her by the shoulders, squeezing them encouragingly, trying to calm the blonde in a confident voice, to which she quietly nodded. The demon angrily interrupted them. Did the young scoundrel not understand at all who was in front of him? Without turning his head in the direction of the demon, Roger addressed him. After Cain was defeated, he thought about the monster all the time. So many years have passed and finally they met face to face. The demon chuckled. Again, a banal story about revenge. If the guy missed him so much, then so be it. He will be merciful and send the young man to meet his friend. Glaring with amber eyes, Roger turned to the demon. He personally wanted to send him to the same place where the monster had sent Cain, so that he would apologize to him for everything he had done. Summoning his Akatsuki blade, the guy was determined. The demon said that he didn't think that the young man would have to use his power, but if so, he was curious to see what he was capable of. Rising up in front of Roger in full glory, the demon shouted defiantly so that the guy would not let him down and have a good time. With a loud cry, Roger ran straight at the demon. He swung, shouting the name of the technique in order for the sword to obey. The Guardian, having received a not-so-significant increase, was surprised that the guy went up to the 8th level, because he had only the 2nd at their first meeting. Covering himself with his huge clawed hand, he broke through the ground. Roger was barely worthy of being his opponent, but that only fueled interest. After letting the guy out of sight for a second, the monster suddenly began to look around, and Roger was already aiming at him with a bow, which Miller did. A flurry of sparkling arrows rained down on the demon, but he beat them off with one of his hands, saying that their forces were not equal and there was no point in fighting. But Roger was determined, immediately flying up to the monster already with a blade and swinging to strike. Red-black sparks started from the sword, wrapping around everything. But the demon caught the sword with his bare hands, without making any effort. Children's fun, and that's all. Clutching the blade in one hand, his blade immediately crumbled into small pieces. Damn, the sword was strong. Roger was thrown away by the blast wave, and the demon, tired of playing such games, went on the attack. A dozen black paws reached out to the guy, which was too fast. The monster realized that his attack had not worked, and his hands were still on the ground, pinning Roger to her. But suddenly, a bright light burst out of the cracks. Throwing away piles of stones in the demon's hands, Roger broke out. While the demon was distracted, he raised his level to the 12th. The monster guessed that Roger's experience was suppressing his level. By keeping his strength, he can confuse the opponent, improves at the end of the battle, using a burst of energy to deal the enemy the last blow. It was too good and profitable a strategy. Roger grinned. The monster was only half right. To deal with ordinary monsters, you can use the attribute obtained during the upgrade, but for a high-level monster like him, Roger needs the momentum attribute for 1 minute after each update. To level up to 4 levels, use the pulse as well as the sword of the decade. His Akatsuki sword has reached the 8th level of pulse. The demon, saying that the young man did not try to intimidate him, again directed his attack with a dozen hands at him. But Roger restored his sword with the help of bright yellow energy in the form of lightning. Angrily looked at the monster. If that was the case, then he was going to use a 900% power attack. With one blow, he weakened his opponent, and he doubled over, screaming in pain. The demon asked incredulously, "Who the hell is this guy?" Not only were the attacks different, but he could still ignore them, and his unusual strength was surprising. Roger minted every word like a copper coin. Why talk in vain? The demon only needs to know that Roger is the man who will end him once and for all. The monster's eyes lit up with hatred. The lights changed from blue to white. The demon was going to drag Roger away with him, attacking him with explosive flames with the last of his strength. The guy didn't even twitch. They were going to defeat him with such a weak attack. It's even ridiculous. But wait a minute. It wasn't aimed at him, but at Dorothy standing behind Roger. If the guy avoids her, then the blonde will get hit. He covered the girl with himself, taking the attack on himself. It was surprisingly too strong. Even though it was a spell, why did Roger feel pain? The demon mocked the guy. He had a lot of such attacks in stock. Didn't the young man want to go down to the 10th level? He was going to finish everything with a final spell, a blow of 100 Asura spears. The sky was lit up with a black, red light, and the ground under Roger was golden. How stupid. Even knowing that this trick was useless, the guy wasn't going to leave. To which the demon maliciously said that he would see how long he would last. But Roger is still on his feet, which means it's his turn to attack. Shouting loudly, Roger struck the last blow. Cain's sacrifice is not in vain. The guy was going to pierce his enemy with a blade so that he would sleep peacefully. In seconds, the monster was defeated, and Roger threw his hand up in victory. Dorothy rushed to him, frightened. She started asking if he was okay. He assured the girl with a radiant smile that everything was fine, but she continued to fuss next to him. The guy had a thin red trickle coming out of his mouth, which clearly did not indicate that everything was in order. In the end, he had to agree, under the pressure of the young lady, that perhaps he was a little injured. But as soon as Dorothy looked down, she screamed. Roger's stomach was hurt by the demon's attack, and the wound looked terrifying. The guy stared blankly at his own body. Indeed, a through wound formed in the middle of the abdomen. What an insidious demon. He discovered Roger's resistance to magic and used a physical attack to inflict damage on him. No wonder he wanted to pull the guy along. Fortunately, he was resistant to pain, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to swing the sword. But suddenly Roger fell to his knees, clutching the wound and coughing loudly. This game only does harm. He fell on his stomach, and Dorothy excitedly rushed to him. The guy thought he could use the gaming experience and move on. But since he crossed the border, he found out that the content of the game is very different from the original. A lot of things are still unavailable, and simple monsters have also become much stronger. This game was definitely designed to torment him. The guy woke up from the fact that someone was calling his name loudly, telling him to get up, otherwise he would definitely be late for school. Half asleep, he did not immediately understand what was happening, but suddenly, he opened his eyes wide. Wait, what? What time is it anyway? He jumped up, sitting up on the bed and looking around. He was wearing a yellow blanket with watermelons and leaves, his home clothes. Continuing to look around, his gaze came across more and more familiar things. His lamp, his curling iron, his computer, it was his room. He's finally back. A gentle but stern voice called him a slob, calling him to have breakfast soon. There was no anger in that voice, just warmth with a hint of discontent. It was his mom. Roger hugged her tightly, and tears came out of his eyes. He missed her so much. She hugged him back, lovingly calling him a fool. The guy pressed closer to her, asking where his father was, whom he also missed impossibly much. But Roger was shocked by his own mother's response. She said that her father still had an hour to cook in the cauldron. The guy froze. What cauldron? A plump, sweet woman with shoulder-length blonde hair suddenly looked nothing like herself. Her voice and appearance changed. She became frighteningly repulsive, starting to say that Roger's father took his disappearance too painfully and tried to forget himself, finding solace at the bottom of the bottle. However, unable to stand the grief, he decided to finish everything on his own. But without calculating, he took the teenagers passing by with him, which also caused them to suffer. For this, Hades sentenced the guy's father to be boiled in a hellish cauldron. And Roger's mom, having lost both her son and her husband in one day, decided to end everything too, unable to stand the grief. But her beloved son was waiting for a much stricter punishment, because it's all his fault. Roger looked at her incredulously. No, that just can't be. To which his mother grinned maliciously. Oh, yes, Masters knew when Ma had to deal with the guy. They were two huge animals in armor, a bull and a horse, the pupils of which were completely white. And the bull had a massive gold ring in its nose. They stared menacingly at Roger with unblinking eyes. In one voice they spoke to him. A huge amount of strange material was found on the guy's computer, which was a serious crime that entails huge social consequences. By a court decision, Roger was sentenced to compulsory surgery for 5 hours a day, for 300 years. The strange animals kept pushing the guy to go with them, saying it was pointless to resist. Roger, in a panic, tried to deny it, saying that he would explain everything to them, as long as they didn't take him anywhere. He screamed in fear that he would never do anything like this again. Dorothy, who had been sitting at the table, turned to the screaming guy. He's finally awake. The girl's eyes filled with tears and she rushed to hug the young man. How she was afraid that she would never see him again. The guy looked ahead of him in surprise, slapping his cheek with his palm. Is this all just a dream? He was thinking about what had happened to him. He was attacked by a demon, and if it wasn't for Dorothy, the game would have ended for him. Fortunately, it was moved to a city where the guy was able to recover. This is one of the advantages of the game world. If you are on the verge of the end, you are treated at the last moment and you survive. Roger received a new ability, a ghost blade and 200 health points. But because of this demon, he could really end up badly. The realization of this came only now. A system prompt appeared in front of the guy, which said that the ability of the Ghost Blade when attacking has a 1% chance of stealing mana from the opponent forever and appropriating it for himself. By filling the mana scale, it was possible to activate the magic crit. Roger looked at this notification in surprise. Now he was like an anti-mage. All that remained was to find sorcerers to train his new ability on them. Dorothy found a letter from the caster with whom the guy fought in the swaps of his previous life and because of which Roger got here. It turned out that the zombie demon was very closely related to the magician Valen. Now it is clear why the Bifta was so heavy. One resistance against a magician is definitely not enough. The guy was determined to train more and raise the level. Roger trained hard, fighting monsters and leveling up, getting power-ups. He singled out all the elite monsters in the vicinity of Tonma City, so the city could sleep peacefully at least for a while. And the guy, I decided to go to the city of Bayashi, telling Dorothy about it. Having eaten a zombie demon, he realized that he had to become stronger than ever. After all, after Kane, Dorothy is all that's left in Roger. The girl was reading a letter that Roger had written by hand. He asked her to be good and wait for him if he would return soon. Then she would definitely be shocked by his strength. She angrily clutched the letter in her hands. Roger beat her again, lied with 3 boxes. Dorothy banged her fist on the wall, swallowing tears of resentment. She can handle it alone, and he, fool, he'll be lost. He didn't know how to sew or cook, and in Bayashi such a fast twist. The girl wiped her bitter tears, turning to the void and hoping that Roger would hear her pleas that he would just come back alive and well. Roger wandered through the woods, thinking out loud. He has lived in Tonma City for 10 years, but this is the first time he leaves it. Now the guy's independent life begins, and Dorothy will finally rest. Oh, if she were real. Roger was daydreaming, deciding that he should continue on his way. Suddenly the guy thought that he was already very used to this world and it would not be so bad to stay. But he checked himself. No, this is nonsense. The young man should understand that this is not his world and he is a stranger here. Suddenly, with a shout, a pink-haired girl in a hiking suit flew out at him, knocking him down. They went tumbling down the mountain. Roger was about to shout, asking who this person was, who suddenly fell on him. She pressed her finger to his lips, calling for silence, because she was being chased by a duergar, a grey dwarf. She continued to ramble on about how these guys were too dangerous and that if they were found, they would not escape. We need to get rid of the gnomes somehow. The pink-haired woman finally introduced herself and apologized for hitting the guy. Her name was Rachel. Roger introduced himself in response, saying that everything was fine. The girl laughed awkwardly, asking if the guy was hurt. He began to keep up the conversation, joking. Suddenly the girl called someone, saying that it was safe here. A huge red dragon came out from behind the bushes and trees, purring contentedly as Rachel ran up to him, hugging his massive neck. The girl began to babble with him, worried that the good boy was scared. The bad uncle had left, which meant that she could return to the village and treat him. Roger's eyes widened in surprise. Rachel was a beast thief. In reality, the dragon looked much more beautiful than from the monitor screen. The girl turned to Roger, asking what he was doing in the woods. He introduced himself as an adventurer from the south, heading to Bayashi. She was thinking when the guy asked if he had a long walk. Since the young man travels on his own 2 feet, the problem was not in time or distance. Rachel turned to the dragon named Miss Haz, gently stroking his big nose. If her friend has enough strength, he can throw Roger across the big lake in a day. The guy was stunned. Flying a dragon all day sounded like something unimaginable. This lake was not only large, but also a haven for monsters. Even in flight it was difficult to avoid them. After finishing that, she turned her head to the guy, saying that she couldn't chat with him for so long. She had to go back to the Dragon's Tooth village. Halflings and duergars have united and therefore the village is now in great danger. Roger stopped her, offering to go with her, since Miss Haz is injured and may need someone's help. Rachel began to refuse, saying that it was too dangerous and the duergar was still chasing them. Besides, she barely knew the guy to burden him like that. Roger grinned. The duergar sounded promising, and his hands itched to join the fight. The pink-haired one insisted that the young man underestimated the strength of the duergar. But it was too late to run. The monster was standing right behind Roger, all white, as if with a black mask, ribbon at the eyes, with horns and ears on his head. He was too big and strong. He swung his fist at Roger, but he managed to jump away, and the dwarf hit the ground. But the huge monster had nothing to do with what is usually called a dwarf. The girl already explained on the move that this was what they were called before the Great Destruction, and later magical radiation turned them into this. Roger looked at her indignantly, asking if the girl wanted to help him defeat the monster, to which she, flashing her heels, refused, because the brother seemed so strong to cope with the dwarf. She just asked the guy to hold out longer, because that way she could run away. Roger sighed dejectedly. It looks like he was just chatted up and left alone. But before he could get upset, the guy took out his sword and decided that this was the first test for a beginner like him. Roger got into a fighting stance, and the grey dwarf rushed at him, starting to pour a flurry of attacks that the guy successfully blocked. But the fact that he himself could not strike a single blow because of the thick skin of the monster, which served as his armor, began to drive him very much out of himself. But after a while of the battle, Roger triumphantly said that the monster was terribly unlucky to meet him. When they were defeated, the guy tried to pretend that he wasn't even tired. But just the sight of his face and bruises said that he was pretty battered. But for such sacrifices, the system notification informed that an improvement in durability was obtained, which is no less important than resistance to any spells. This attribute was responsible for resisting effects, such as pain from serious injuries, stun, numbness, tossing, and telekinesis. Overall, this attribute was worth spending time on. Throwing the KT slack into the air, Roger decided to pump it. The Duergers should have been more careful. Already at night, the guy was standing on a rock, arms crossed and looking at the den of Duergers. Judging by the search for life, there were about 2,000 of them here. Roger made a pained face. He didn't know whether to cry or laugh, because if he fought with everyone at once, they would make a chop out of him, so he decided to see what magic things he could use. The magic rope did not fit, neither did the spell scrolls, and he decided to leave a piece of rotten meat for dark times. If it wasn't for the system prompt, which said that there are a lot of pathogenic bacteria in rotten meat, and if they get into the gastrointestinal tract, they can cause diarrhea, then Roger would have kept it for himself, but an ingenious plan matured in his head. He began to talk aloud about the fact that impregnable fortresses are being taken by pestilence, and as soon as the monsters weaken, he will quickly cope with all of them. There was only one water source nearby. Duergers come to drink every day and bring supplies to their comrades. The corpse poison will do its job. That's how Roger reasoned, dropping a piece of meat into the water, giggling nastily. Now we just have to wait. After 3 hours of waiting and ambush, he finally achieved the result he needed. With a shout of victory, he rushed to the caves with the lake, the water of which he personally poisoned. Having entered the cave, having previously closed his nose, he still felt a terrible smell coming from the depths. He decided to finish his business as soon as possible, so as not to spend there longer than planned. But as soon as Roger raised his sword to slay the 2 dwarves who tasted his water, a whole crowd of monsters appeared behind him, several times larger than him. It was a trap. They simply adhered to the rules of quarantine, leaving 2 poisoned in one part of the cave. The guy praised them, pointing the finger up, and dozens of monsters and fists rushed at him. Roger used all the possible attributes that he had. A ring of suicides, a bottle of the elements, shouting names and raining from his mouth. But suddenly there was a powerful explosion, after which the monsters could not stand. At first, the guy did not understand why it was so powerful and how it originated, but after a hint from the system, he realized that the Duergers were experimenting with flammable substances, a large concentration of which could cause an explosion. A pretty battered guy loudly swore at the creators of the game, in which almost nothing was subjected to any logic. The first thought that flashed through my head was that it looked like the real end had come for Roger this time. He remembered how he was very battered by the explosion, and after that, but one person will not be able to exist. Opening one eye first, he tried to figure out where he was. Was it the afterlife, or has he gone back to his own world? But the architecture was not like the one in his home world, nor the one he had seen earlier in the city of Tanma. Where is he? The system prompt said that Roger had defeated 2,000 Duergers and his stamina level was significantly increased. The system was still here, which meant that the guy was alive and well. Did the system keep him alive because of his resilience? But even in this state, it is fashionable to hold out for only a couple of seconds. Without treatment, he would not be able to. The guy vaguely remembered that a huge crack appeared due to the explosion, into which he fell. Maybe some mysterious person cured him, and he just didn't remember it. It seems that he has seen posts from game developers on this topic in his world. An unknown creature, who called himself a bat, approached him and said that he had healed Roger's wounds, sat down next to him. The guy, frightened, hit him, shouting loudly. Later, the robot Abba explained everything to the young man, and he apologized to him. It took him a long time to fully recover Roger, of course. If it wasn't for his resilience, then nothing would have happened. The guy told Abba not to be modest. There was no wound on his body, and in general he felt rested. Apparently the robot really saved him. But Roger noted that Abba looked strange. He fussed, hurrying to introduce himself, complaining about his bad manners. He had not seen living people for a long time, so he forgot how to behave. Abba was an elder mentor at the Jiu Temple. Roger was surprised at what the underground temple looked like inside, which he was just inside. True, the temple looked abandoned, and Abba said that he had not met living people for a long time. It turns out that Roger is the only person here. Abba said that there used to be a lot of people in this temple, but one day a messenger from the ruler of Talon arrived with a letter. Mentor Feng hurriedly left after reading this letter and never returned. The rest of the students soon also left this place, and those who stayed suddenly disappeared overnight. Only a little squirrel remained with the poor robot. But soon she submitted to time, and he was left completely alone. Roger tried to find out when that fateful night happened, but Abba couldn't remember it. The guy had never heard of Talong State and Jiu Temple before. The buildings were made in a rather restrained style. Maybe these people lived here even before those explosions. The guy kept asking questions, trying to find out how long the robot was underground and whether there had always been a city here. To which Abu replied that he had to erase a lot of memory to complete the last assignment, so now his head was empty, like in a barrel. As a sign of confirmation of his words, he tapped his hand on the metal head, from which a characteristic sound was heard. Roger slowed down, but suddenly noticed that something small and shiny had fallen out of Abba's head. Abba explained that it was a memory crystal where important memories of what the robot was doing were stored. His hand did not rise to remove such valuable material, which in fact was completely unnecessary, but he still offered Roger to take a look if he wanted. The guy confusedly replied that the robot was overreacting with hospitality. Abba replied that he had not remembered the faces or names of the people he was watching for a long time. It may not be very good to do this, but it was certainly better than if they simply disappeared from the memory of this world. Roger cleared his throat, saying there was something to it. He took the memory crystal in his hand, regretting that he could not read these memories, because he was interested in taking a glimpse of the world before. The system detected the crystal, allowing Roger to use the crystal. He was transported back to that time as soon as he used the artifact. The smells and fog felt quite real. This is a real dive. It really was even cooler than the virtual reality glasses in his world. The past civilization was more advanced than them. Roger's main goal was to study their technology, so he wanted to learn as much as possible from the temple students. But suddenly, he came across a strange silhouette. Big, not like a human. It was a huge duergar, who immediately hit the guy in the cheekbone with a powerful fist. Roger flew away from the impact, coming out of Abba's memory and asking him why the monster is so gigantic if they should have been very small before. Abba said that he apologized to Roger because it was rude to give a guest a cracked memory crystal. The guy began to guess that the duergars were not at all from the robot's memories. He, in turn, continued to say that these big guests, too, like Roger, fell from above, and Abba even forgot to offer them tea, which was very rude. The guy shouted to himself to hide behind him, intending to stretch a little on those monsters who managed to get away from him. The robot, standing behind, kept telling the guests that he would definitely give them tea. Roger was getting angry. But how could the robot not understand that these were not guests? Then his gaze rises sharply and stops at such large duergars, which he has not seen yet. The system notified that the boss of the duergars was standing in front of him, and their total number was 5,000. From such a figure, Roger's jaw almost fell to the floor.